early, but I did want to take a minute, like I say, to thank everybody for coming out today. I hope that you find this to be valuable content. In your packets we have a complete slide deck from this show. We do have a study that the Guardian did on leave management in 2017. Of course, since 2018 is not over, we don't have a current one yet. There is a directory of all of the people at our agency, and then there is just a 5-question survey at the end, which we'd really appreciate it if you would take just 30 seconds at the end and fill that out for us, because since this is our first attempt at this, any feedback would be greatly appreciated. One thing I'm going to encourage you guys is when Jason, who I will be introducing momentarily, gives his presentation, you might want to pay attention, because at the end there is going to be a 5-question game, if you will. Everybody gets to take out their phones for that, so it'll be kind of fun. And the winner gets a gift certificate to Ocean's Hub. So it's very competitive, because who answers the fastest and who answers the most accurately, you get the most points, and you get to rise up the leaderboard. So anyway, it's kind of fun, so pay attention. So again, I do want to introduce everybody that we have here today. Let's see how well I am at operating this. Oops. See, I'm too aggressive.
There you go.
So with the Guardian Life Insurance, Jason Pesci will be our speaker today, and he is the senior group practice leader. And then Marshall Johnson is our sales rep, our local sales rep with the Guardian. We've worked with the Guardian for many years, one of our preferred carriers, and I was excited that they were willing to step up and help us out with the speaker today. From our team, Olympic Crest Insurance, of course, I am Nancy Giacalone. I am the president and founder of Olympic Crest Insurance. And then Jim is my husband, and he helps us out with IT needs and some other things as occur. Nick Giacalone, who many of you have met, is a benefit consultant at the agency. Cindy Funk is my longest tenured employee. She is our benefit analyst and also does compliance. Danielle Brown is account manager as well. And then Colin Walters, who a lot of you spoke to on the phone, is our business development specialist. And he's kind of the face of Olympic Crest, really gets out in the community and creates relationships and opportunities for us. We do have 2 people that are still back at the office, manning the office and taking care of other clients who weren't able to join us. We have Elizabeth Pate, who is our benefits specialist. She handles all the eligibility, any questions. She's the voice that usually answers the phone when you call in. And then we also have Corinne Scully, and she is our individual and Medicare specialist. So it's really important for us to have that person on staff, because a lot of employers, they don't pay for any cost towards the cost of dependence, and it's too expensive for people to put their spouse or children on a benefit plan. So we help them with individual alternatives, and then also help individuals that are aging into Medicare. So we have a very well-rounded staff. That is our local presence, and then we're also part of a national organization called Benefit Advisors Network, and we have ERISA attorneys, HR specialists that we can draw on for additional resources. So that's a little bit about us. I do want to, like I say, formally introduce Jason, who will be speaking today. And Jason is the group practice leader with Guardian Life Insurance Company. He's been in the absence management space for about 15 years. He's worked with 2 insurance carriers, including Guardian, in developing FMLA platforms and best practices when it comes to leave management. He's presented at multiple conferences and employee forums, and we're lucky enough to have him flown up here today. So, and it's a beautiful day to show off our town, so it makes us feel a little bit better. So we will be served lunch. There will be a salad and entree and a dessert. I think everybody did take their little placement tag, so they will know what to serve you. And if there's any questions or problems, please feel free to reach out to a server or any of us with the Olympic Crest tag. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason.
Thanks, Nancy. Appreciate it. Appreciate everybody coming out today. So we're going to spend about an hour today. I want this to be interactive. If you guys have questions, different scenarios, obviously let's get them answered. Obviously I'll be around afterwards as well if you have individual situations or anything that's going on. So got the formal introduction. Based out of San Diego, So really my role with Guardian is I report up to the operational and claim organization, but I'm kind of liaison between sales and service. So help explain our process, what we do every day, what the market is doing and such. Something? Okay, there we go. Just checking. So what we're going to do today is we're going to spend some time going through, and I know a lot of you have started filming through. There's copies in your folders if you want to take notes on anything that we go over today. But we're going to spend some time talking about the leave management laws, what you need to know, just some basics, kind of an FMLA 101. Not going to spend a ton of time on that, but then talk about market trends. What are your peer groups doing out there? What is Guardian seeing from an industry and marketplace perspective in trending with absence management? You know, we look at FMLA, 10, 15 years ago, carriers were looking at, employers that had 10,000 plus lives. Well, now in today's marketplace, it's everyone. Everyone is looking for an outsourcing solution. Everyone is having issues and problems with administering FMLA, not only from the federal perspective, but also the state perspective. I usually, when I travel across the country, I usually apologize for being from California because we've made everything difficult for everyone else. Well, Washington's kind of doing a good job itself. So, here I can say, I'm sorry that you're in Washington as well, so you feel my pain being in California. Because in California, there's 12 state leave laws that employees can be eligible for. And right now, there's proposals to add 3 additional ones for 1/119 or 1/120. I just read an article on the plane ride up yesterday. Last year, there were 200 different proposals across the entire country for state leave laws. 200 proposals. How do you manage that? How do you stay on top of that? And not necessarily the regulations, but the case law that comes down from it. Last year, this isn't a Guardian commercial, but I'm going to talk about some of the things we do from a best practice perspective. But last year, we made 64 modifications to the way we adjudicate FMLA based on court laws. Court interpretations, different lawsuits that happen, 64 changes in how we process FMLA. So it's a constantly evolving, I would say, beast from an administrative perspective. I'm going to talk about employer challenges. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of head shaking there, like, yes, that's me, that's what I deal with. The study that you have, we do it every 3 years. And in that study, what we're going to do is look at what we've done. The first one in 2013 is we looked at our 5 best practices. What are the best practices from an absence management FMLA perspective? And then in 2015, things kind of quieted down with FMLA. With ACA, with all the healthcare reform, employers, brokers kind of had to take a step back and deal with that. But now that it's temporarily, hopefully quieted down, in 2017, we're looking at continuous improvement. So that index study is not just Guardian clients, it's not just a Guardian commercial. We actually hire an independent consultant that surveys the industry when it comes to that. So when you're looking at this, when you're looking at, what are other people doing out there, what are other companies doing, what are my peer groups doing, there's a lot of great data that you can use in making a case, hey, I need to outsource my FMLA. So talking about the 5 best practices, this is really key points that we look at, a full return to work program. Now, when you think about a return to work, what are you usually thinking about? You're thinking about work comp and you're thinking about short-term disability. Do you have I'm not going to have you raise your hands because I'm not going to call anybody out, but do you have a written return to work policy for FMLA? When an employee is ready to come back to work, do you have protocols in place to bring someone back to work? Probably not. And if you do, maybe you need to look at revisiting it. Absence management is a lot like real estate. What are the top 3 things in real estate? Location, location, location. What are the top 3 things in absence management? Document, document, document. You don't have it documented, you're leaving yourself open to interpretation. So it's funny, every time I travel around the country extensively, and every, living in Southern California, I work from home most of the time, but when I travel the country, I always like I always turn on the TV and put it on ESPN or CNN or something like that, because about every other commercial break, there's a lawyer that comes on. Have you been treated unfairly? Call this number for a free consultation. Down in Southern California, it's Goldberg and Osborne, 1-800-THE-EAGLE. My kids actually know their jingle because it's on so much. But if you think about that, you have an employee who maybe is off of work, you felt you maybe handled it correctly, they see that ad. All it takes is one phone call to a law firm, They call the Department of Labor. So you think, you get a call from the Department of Labor. We're coming next Wednesday to do an audit on your FMLA program. What is that? Open up your books. What are your books? You know, what do you do from a return to work perspective? What do you have documented? And then that comes in with reporting capabilities. You know, when you look at outsourcing, why are you doing that? Because you want to create a consistent, compliant environment for all of your employees. No matter if you have, let's say you have your all-star employee right here, last one out of the building if the building's burning, and then you have someone over here who's maybe on a performance plan, maybe not doing the greatest job. You got to treat them the same. You basically have to go in the back of your desk drawer and find that old whiteout that you used to use. Remember whiteout? I'm really dating myself when I do that. But you really, when you're dealing with employees in FMLA, you basically have to take that whiteout, write out their name. You don't know their name. You have to treat everyone the same. And that can be difficult. And that's why administering it yourself is difficult, because you're like, oh, take all the time off you need. Do what you need to do to take care of yourself. You know, I have a personal situation where, now I'm going to date myself again. 11 years ago, my wife had to have a pretty traumatic brain surgery. 13-hour resection at UCLA Medical Center that removed about that much of her brain. And so she was blind for about 6 months, had some cognitive things that she had to deal with. So when I called my boss and told her what was going on, and I worked for an insurance company, if you want to LinkedIn stalk me, you can find out who I worked for. But anyway, called my boss and said, I need to take some time off. Andrea's sick. She has to have surgery. Take all the time off you need, whatever you need. I fill out one form, didn't do anything. Still got my regular paycheck, everything. Then I get a call from corporate HR about 12 weeks later. Jason, we're starting the process of terminating you because we have nothing on why you're not working anymore. So even insurance companies can't get it right sometimes with their own employees. So what are you doing when you are saying, hey, take all the time off you need? You're exposing yourself to adverse situations. There's going to be some great information coming up about the cost of just defending. $78,000 just to defend yourself from an FMLA lawsuit. And usually FMLA is it's like a kitchen sink claim. You know, there's other things. There's return to work accommodations, or I was treated unfairly. FMLA gets thrown in that bucket, but $78,000 is the average cost just to defend yourself. Not that you did anything wrong, but just to defend yourself. So there's some compelling numbers in there, and all that data is in some of the slides that we'll get into. Health management integration, that's another best practice. So when you think about every FMLA, or every short-term disability claim is a medical event, and about 70 to 80% of FMLA leaves are also a serious health condition. So integrated EAP, disease management, healthy babies programs, you know, having that involved in the FMLA process, because a lot of times, you know, if you're administering yourself, do you have a nurse case manager or somebody kind of sitting in your closet to pop out to, hey, I can review this certification to see if it's medically necessary? You probably don't. So having that vocational medical overlay, having that integration with any of your healthcare programs is key. And then also a centralized intake process. You know how Amazon just bought Whole Foods? What are they trying to create? A one-stop shop approach, whether it's online, whether it's in the store. And actually I just read an article that, you know, if you have a Prime membership, you get 10% off at Whole Foods on items now. So I love landing in Seattle yesterday and seeing, I've never seen those Prime airplanes before. The Amazon airplanes, I took pictures and I sent to my 11-year-old. I was like, look, Amazon's got their own planes. He's like, oh, Dad, that's so cool. What do they have on there? I'm like, probably stuff that's getting shipped to our house tomorrow. Who knows? Seriously. Did you know that one of those boxes you get from Amazon, you can actually fill those back up? Because I'm moving right now. You can actually fill those back up and they'll pick them up and take them to Goodwill. I didn't know that. That's something I learned brand new, because, I mean, the purge has happened at our house when it comes to moving. But those Amazon boxes, you think, oh, what a waste. You can use those for Goodwill. So there's my little public services announcement there for you. So, and then the same resource for STD and FMLA. Again, that one-stop shop approach, where if 70-80% of your FMLA leaves are also a concurrent short-term disability claim, why not create a singular process for you and your employees to handle that? So that's really key, and there's some statistics about how that has shifted and how more and more employers are looking for that short-term disability and FMLA integration. So talking about some of the data that's in that index study. And again, we hired an independent company to do this. This isn't Guardian employees or Guardian companies that we utilize. But look at the differences in that 50 to 250 lives. That's where we're seeing the most activity in people wanting to outsource. Because you think the 1,000 plus employee groups, maybe even the 500 plus, a lot of them have already started an outsource, or they've bought some software, they're doing something to help co-manage their FMLA. But that 50 to 250 space, we're seeing a massive amount of uptick in wanting to outsource. I travel the country every single week, and that is Guardian's #1 space right now, that 50 to 250 market, because you've either had a claim that's happened, or you have someone that's retiring, or you just can't handle it. Because a lot of times, whoever handles FMLA in this room, was it on your job description when you got hired? Probably not. Your boss probably took out your job description, got a little marker out, put a little bullet point there. FMLA administrator, hey, congratulations. You don't get a raise for that, you just had more time, One of the things we see with outsourcing for the first time, especially in that 50 to 250 space, and there's a slide on it, you're gonna see about a 50% reduction in your administrative time in dealing with FMLA. So if you think the time that you spend on FMLA on a daily basis or absence management, throughout the year, if you can get 50% of your time back by outsourcing, why would you not do that? Why would you not want to take that administrative burden off your plate, but then also take that compliance risk, that litigation risk, because you don't want to get a call from 1-800-THE-EAGLE the next day. Hi, this is Bill from, they have these great voices too. These lawyers, I don't know if they're the actual lawyers, but they sound good on TV. So talking about some of the challenges in that mid-sized market, so when we're looking at that 50 to about 700 space, we looked at what's your biggest problem, what are your top 5 issues? Coordinating absence types. What type of leave is it? You just can't say, oh, it's a California leave. What leave is it in California? What leave is it in Washington? In California, there's 12 leave laws. What leave law does that fall under? Applying ABA correctly. So when you're able to bring someone back to work, are you giving them the tools and resources needed, and are you looking at it from a business perspective and getting them back to work on if you can accommodate them? Again, I talked about that written return to work policy, but FMLA, you just can't have it be short-term disability or work comp. Tracking intermittent leaves. Who likes intermittent leaves? Raise your hand. Yeah, they're a pain. They're traditionally our #1 challenge for employers because they're working, they're gaining time back, they're taking time off, and you kind of have those hammock approaches. We call them hammock approaches, and we can see them on our operational reports where the usage of intermittent time. So Monday morning, Wednesday, Thursday, oh, Friday afternoon, I don't feel good. How do you manage that? How do you effectively make sure that that's medically reasonable? Again, having a nurse case manager in your back pocket or hiding in a closet, you probably don't have that to challenge a doctor. Because you know that as an employer, if you think something's not right or kind of fishy, you can call the medical provider and say, hey, I have this employee, they're taking every Monday morning and Friday afternoon off. Is that medically necessary? You can ask that. Did you know that? You can do that. That's awesome. I saw some heads shaking yes and no. The yes one's good for you guys. Because a lot of employers, they just rubber stamp it. There's a good study that SHRM just did. 40% of HR specialists approve leaves that they know are fraudulent or that they know there's something wrong with them. So 40% of your peers are just approving stuff because they don't want to deal with it. They don't have the resources to deal with it. And then finding alternate positions. When you can bring someone back, how do you get them back to work successfully? How do you keep them at work? And then interpreting federal and state laws. The federal regs really haven't changed that much since they came out, but what has changed about them? The legal interpretation of them. How they're administered, how they're supposed to be handled, how you apply intermittent time, how you're supposed to report it back to them. Because when they came out in 1992, email didn't really exist except from Al Gore and the government. So really, how do you handle that? Because you still have to give them a U.S. first-class postal stamp notification rights, but you can email it to them as well. So interpreting those federal and state laws can become an issue, and also from an eligibility perspective. In my home state of Iowa, where I'm originally from, my dad is actually a broker back there, and he just hired his 4th employee. And when he hires his 4th employee, he now has to adhere to the Iowa state leave laws. So it's only 4 employees in the state of Iowa. In Wisconsin, in-laws are considered, usually you have to take a leave because of your in-laws because they're driving you nuts, but you can actually take leave laws in Wisconsin to take care of your in-laws. A lot of people don't know about that. So each state is almost its own country. I mean, you know, the Republic of California, I mean, it's funny, every 4 years there's always some initiative that's trying to get on the ballot for us to secede from the Union, or us to become, last time it was to become 5 different states. Yeah, it actually almost got on the ballot. I signed the paper because I'm like, I just want to see what happens. I kind of just want to see what happens, you know? And it was funny, all the different state names that they gave it. I took San Diego, I can't remember what they called San Diego. They called it Coastal California. Hi, I'm from Coastal California. Like, that's got a nice ring to it, you know? So, but all those different states that keep just coming up with those additional laws. And like I just said, 200 proposals last year for leave laws in the different states. So take a step back to let's talk about FMLA 101 real quick. I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but the 12 or 26 weeks of unpaid leave, the 26 is where it comes into military, and military is just becoming, obviously, with a lot of people being deployed and called up, military leaves are a real important facet to make sure you're managing that correctly. And also, a lot of employers, they have overarching military leaves to extend time out. You know, one of the benefits of living in San Diego, it's actually the largest military population and a civilian population in the world. The military, I think, $12 billion was spent last year in San Diego alone, just from the military perspective. And you know, one of the things that people always ask me, gosh, you travel so much, Jason, don't you worry about your family, your kids, all that stuff? And so here's my house right here. So here's my house. Across the street, I have a retired Vietnam vet who could probably kick my butt still right now. Got a guy over here who's been deployed twice to Afghanistan, great guy. Had his leg amputated off, but he's right there. And then I have a guy right here, his name's Steve. I don't know what Steve does. Steve doesn't tell me what he does. And Steve disappears for 2 weeks and then shows back up again. So I have the most protected house. I don't have an alarm system. I don't have to worry about anything because I have all these military guys that live around my kids and make sure everything's nice and safe. But military laws are really, really important, and make sure you're applying those correctly. But another thing I want to point out on this list is the works at the location where an employer has 50 or more employees within a 75-mile radius. Who came up with that 75 miles? Man, they just throw a dartboard. Hey, 75 sounds good. One thing I want to talk about is that you got to remember that if you have somebody that's remote that reports into that site, that's considered, that's where they report into. That's where their location is at. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about if you have remote people. You know, a lot of people have a sales rep in New York or, you know, anything like that. So think about that when you're thinking about the different laws out there. Qualifying event, I'm not going to get into great detail about that. I think everybody's got that lined up. Job restoration, one thing I want to point out with this is that shift isn't always considered the equivalent unless if it's written into their contract or written into their job description. So that comes up a lot with overnight shifts where I built up my seniority to get the overnight shift. Unless if it says on my job description or in my employment contract overnight shift, I'm not guaranteed it back. Shift is in getting their hours back that they were working before. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about shift. But location, responsibilities, opportunities for bonus and overtime. I heard someone talk about how they have a collective bargaining agreement or some union population. You know, there's always different nuances in handling that from a union perspective, so make sure you keep that in mind as well. Intermittent leaves, already kind of talked about this. This is just kind of the definitions of it, about providing care. The one thing I like on here is an employer can require appointments to be scheduled with least disruptive business operations. So Wednesdays are like your biggest day, like you're getting a shipment in. And oh, my appointment is every Wednesday at 8 o'clock, right when the truck shows up. You as the employer can say, you need to have a different appointment time frame. Or that Monday morning, Friday afternoon, you can push back on that with least disruption. Or, one thing I just found out, I was just in Detroit last week doing a similar seminar for a lot of auto parts manufacturers. And they came up with me these questions, like, they're coming when the truck shows up and they're taking off, or their migraine comes up, or, oh, I have a doctor's appointment. You can deny that. You can actually deny that. If they knew that they had that appointment, they know the detriment that it does to business operations, as long as you set those expectations. And again, top 3 things: document, document, document. Document that on the front end from that perspective. From a best practices perspective with Guardian, what we do and what you want to look for if you're outsourcing is providing multiple methods to report that intermittent time, whether if it's telephone, email, a mobile website. Each occurrence can be reviewed up against a certification. So you don't have to take a to be determined or as needed as a completed certification form. You can ask for frequency and duration, and you can push back on those Monday morning and Friday afternoon migraine headaches that show up when it's a beautiful day outside. You can actually challenge those. We actually have internal reporting where we look at those hammock approaches and we push back on the employee, but also if you have providers. If you have employees that are going to the same doctor and you kind of see the same certification form, you can push back on that doctor from a medical necessity perspective. Does that make sense? Okay. And then anytime it falls out of that occurrence pattern, you can recertify. So if someone's approved for 2 times a week for 3 hours, all of a sudden that third time shows up, you can ask for a recertification right then and there. One thing about intermittent leaves and managing it is that, when you look at outsourcing, can a company guarantee that they're going to stomp out 100% of, fraud or fraudulent claims or those gray area claims? No. But what you can do is that you can look for them to manage it as tightly to the process as possible, as tightly to the regs. They can be the bad guy. So when you have that employee that's not playing nice in the sandbox, we can push on them to get that certification form completed. We can deny their intermittent time if they're not providing the proper documentation. So you can kind of step back from that perspective. Yeah, they might call you, jabber in your ear a little bit, but you know what? That's what you're paying us to do, is to take that burden off your plate, to take that administrative stress, and sometimes it kind of feels like babysitting, doesn't it? Sometimes. And it's kind of that old moxie where, 20% of your claims take up 80% of your time. That's where those intermittent leaves come into play. So that's why looking at outsourcing to take that interactive process off your plate. And then the last one, I talked about that 40% of HR professionals say that they're approving leaves that they know aren't correct or they're fraudulent or they're gray area. 40%. It's what we call rubber stamping. There's a slide, I think, I don't know if we kept it on the end, that talked about that 50% reduction time, and then there's also some statistics that we look at from a frequency and duration and approval percentage, but that can always get thrown out the door if you're just approving everything. So internally ask yourself the question, how many what's the percentage of my short-term disability approvals? You probably know that right off the top of your head. What do you know about FMLA? It's probably 100%. Are you approving 100% of them? So again, managers and supervisors can be held liable. HR professionals can be held liable if you're rubber stamping everything and then all of a sudden, slacker employee, Jim, I'm not pointing at you. I'm pointing at this guy right here. He's standing right here. He's invisible. He's like a hologram. So I'm not pointing at you. Don't think I'm pointing at you. But when you have that employee who gets that bad taste in their mouth, but you've been approving everything, but all of a sudden, performance plan guy, oh, you need to get us some documentation on that. You're not being consistent. You've got to be consistent with all of your employees in that process. Questions?
I've got a question on that last bullet point.
Better be a softball, Marshall.
So if your culture is kind of family first, and yeah, maybe there's some rubber stamping, what's the potential compliance of approving everything? I mean, it says could deny legitimate FML leave, but what about just approving something that's not legitimate? What compliance standpoint?
Well, the problem is that if you're just rubber stamping everything, like technically you're okay, but you have a business to run. You want your employees at work. You don't want them taking time off and going to Ocean's 5 and going bowling or something like that. You want them at work, and so you can go through that process of rubber stamping, but then you're detrimenting all of your other employees. You're detrimenting their unit, their productivity, standards that they have to meet because now they're doing that employee's job, and that plays into culture. Yeah, it might be kind of family first, but it gets around. Oh, hey, I took some time off so I could, take a cruise up to Alaska. I told them my back and stuff. Like, it's not good. In California, we say no bueno. My 11-year-old says no bueno, Dad. Don't get your homework done. No bueno. I'm like, do you know any other Spanish words? No. So that rubber stamping. So making sure it encourages that misuse. But then also when you look at how are you calculating their hours, because there's different methods in how you calculate their eligibility and what they have from an hours available perspective. So you have that calendar 12 months where you can take the 12 weeks off during that 12 months, and then January 1st, it refreshes. You know, some employers administer that way, but you're encouraging, you know, taking time off during the holidays, then all of a sudden January 1st, I got a fresh bank, I can take more time off. But from an administrative perspective, the way you want to do is you want to have it rolling, where if I take a week off in October, I don't get that week back until next October. But that's hard to calculate. How do you manage that? I mean, I met with a 3,000 life group in Buffalo about a month ago. 3,000 lives, you think, oh, they got it in place, they got to have systems, they got to have some lease software. Met this great lady, she was phenomenal. Actually, she emails me a little too much right now, but I said, hey, so what do you have from a documentation perspective? Because they did decide to outsource the Guardian. And so she's like, oh, let me go get that for you. And so she had this big office, and she walked back, got her little key out, unlocked it, and it was a red leather bound book. And she had each page, she had all the employees alphabetized in there, and then she would put a tick mark when they take days off. Now, when I met with the broker, when I met with the CFO afterwards, he's like, he didn't go to the meeting because he's kind of scared of her. But he's like, how'd the meeting go? I think I got her. I think she's good. I think she's going to want to outsource. And he goes, good, because if this building caught on fire or something happened to her, you'd be in trouble. So when you think about your documentation, what is that documentation? You know, a lot of people just have those Excel spreadsheets that they've developed their own macros and stuff, but you have to keep employee files, and you have to keep them separate from their HR files. Like, your FMLA paperwork can't be in your HR file. It has to be in a separate file. So keep that in mind when you're looking, maybe when you go back and you're like, okay, how am I doing things today? Make sure they stay separate. And some of the questions that you want to ask yourself, and I'm going backwards here. There we go. So what are some of the questions you should ask yourself when you're looking at your own program, when you're kind of looking in the mirror, doing your self-reflection tonight maybe about what you're doing from an FMLA perspective, but then also what do I want to do going forward? So what are the percentage of your STD claims have an FMLA request? How's that process being handled? Is it singular? Is it separate? Do your managers and supervisors know what to do? Like, ask yourself that. If I'm Joe and I'm on a crew and I help put up light posts or telephone poles. I'm a contractor for putting up telephone poles, and I work on a mobile unit. I tell my boss, hey, I got to take some time off, my wife's sick. Whatever, can we talk about this when we get back to the office? And then nothing happens from it. But if someone in the corporate office, I need to take time off, okay, here's what you do, here's your paperwork, it's inconsistent. So you got to manage the process, not manage the supervisor employee. And that's why getting buy-in to outsource from them is key. Spending time on implementation, spending time on training them to understand. It's not just Big Brother watching us and, oh, we used to be, like Marshall said, we're paternalistic, we used to approve everything, but most managers and supervisors don't know that they can be held liable if they handle something incorrectly. I mean, there was actually just a lawsuit in San Diego where a manager and supervisor, the employer covered it, but they had to pay $85,000 to the employee because they didn't she needed to take time off to take care of her kid taking doctor's appointments. Supervisor wouldn't let her take the time off, and then her kid got in a car accident with the person that she set up the alternative things with. And so, very messy situation, but that manager and supervisor got sued for the medical bills because he is like, no, you're not taking your time off. You can't go, we need you here. So, knowing what your managers and supervisors can and cannot do in that process is really key. What are your percentages of FMLA approvals? 100%? 0%? Do you even know what they are? How are intermittent leaves handled? How are you keeping up with federal, states, and now we have another great thing, local leaves, municipalities. They're so much fun. They're getting more and more involved. City of Austin just passed it. You have Seattle, you have Portland, you have San Francisco, Washington, D.C. Municipalities are now getting involved in paid leaves and protected time off. So how are you keeping up with that? As a carrier, we're struggling with some of the regs from a municipal perspective because, like, for example, City of San Francisco, we don't even know what the claim form of the interactive process is. It's supposed to be, right now, it's an employee saying, I need to take time off, and we just be like, okay, I'm going to document it, but there's no standards on how you're supposed to document that. So we're actually working with the City of San Francisco to come up with a process so we can outsource and take over those City of San Francisco leaves. And then that last question, I already talked about this one. If you were audited today by the Department of Labor, how confident are you? Because they're not just going to look at your FMLA. They're going to be like, oh, I'm going to ignore your OSHA. I'm going to ignore your work comp. I'm going to ignore all your disability plans. I just want to look at FMLA. No, they're going to look at everything. So how prepared are you if you get that phone call? So think about that when you're maybe going to sleep tonight. Here's some facts and figures. Getting a call from the Department of Labor, yes, it's kind of maybe traumatic and doesn't happen a ton, but it just takes one phone call. But what are some of the statistics around it about mismanaging your FMLA? What are the costs involved? So the average cost of absence for employers is 6% of your payroll. Average. Could be more, could be a little less. Most likely it's 6% or more of your payroll is being lost because of mismanaging your FMLA process. The average cost to defend a lawsuit, $78,000 in 2015. The average awarded damage is $87,500 to $450,000. This is just FMLA. This isn't the other stuff that the employer might have done. This is just FMLA damages. Increased litigation since 2014. States that have statutory leave plans, 34. Actually, that number has increased. Connecticut just signed up paid family leave law. 3 out of 5 employers have difficulty interpreting laws or even knowing what the laws are. The top reason for FMLA leave is employee health condition. The top complaint was termination. You think, oh, I don't terminate my employees, or the terminations I've done, they've all been valid. You have to look at how you're terminating them and making sure you're documenting and that it's separate and that it wasn't because of retaliation of them taking time off or because of their medical condition. And also another thing that's really gotten scary is social media. Social media has become more and more involved with terminating employees. There's actually just a court case that Guardian was involved in Colorado where, because we were the servicer, so we get named in the lawsuit. And it was a young girl, about 25, 26 years old. She worked at a light manufacturing facility just north of Denver in a smaller town. And she was in a car accident. Didn't have to have back surgery, but had to get pain management, some physical therapy, had to get the little shots in the back, and employers spent about $3,000 modifying her workstation so she could come back to work. And for this employer, that was a big deal. There's only about 150, 200 employees. So to spend that kind of money, a lot of the other employees did not like that. They're like, oh, you're rolling out the red carpet. I think in the papers they called her princess. And so they got one of those little stools that you see sometimes cashiers sitting on when they have back problems and such. So did all those modifications for her, and then last 4th of July, big party, downtown, all the bars, all that fun stuff. Social media, there's a 30-second Instagram video of her doing her best Coyote Ugly impression on a bar. She was up on a bar, dancing, hooting, hollering. Comes in the next day, all the employees are like, oh, look at Princess dancing on the tables. Look at all this, look at all this. And so, the employer got really upset. And when she came in the following day to come back to work, they fired her. Said, we paid all this money to modify your workstation, to do all this stuff for you. Obviously you can do it, you're fine. But what were her restrictions, limitations? She couldn't stand for 4 hours consistently. She had to have a place to sit and rest for at least 15-minute increments in that 4-hour block. So she gets fired. Calls her dad. Dad gets a lawyer. Gets into a litigation process. There was only one question asked in that process, whole thing. Lawyer said, do you know, was she dancing on that bar for 4 straight hours? Well, no, it's just a 30-second video. Well, her restriction limitations that she has to have a break after 4 hours of consistently standing. So, do you know if she danced for 4 straight hours? If she did, good for her, but she didn't, but there wasn't documentation around that. So that $450,000, that was her lawsuit. She got $450,000. And she lost her job, small town, couldn't get a job anywhere else in that town. Her name was trashed. So you got to think about that when you have maybe that not rock star employee and there's a social media of him or her riding on a motorcycle this weekend. Watch out from a retaliation perspective. So keep that in mind when you're always looking at social media or employees talking. ADA, I'm not going to get into great detail on this on the essence of time, but what you can do from bringing them back to work. And again, if you cannot do it because of a business decision, document, document, document. Make sure it's not, oh, because we don't like this person, or, you know, they don't do a good job. Now, you might be thinking that internally, but if you're making a business decision, make sure you're documenting from an ADA perspective on if you can accommodate them or if you can't, because again, you have to be consistent. So for that late girl that I just talked about, where they spent about $3,000 modifying her workstation, if another employee wants that down the road, that employer has to do it, if it's the same job, because it was an assembly line job. So you gotta make sure you're consistent and not just, you know, I guess you'd say cherry picking because of your positive employees. Here's some of the settlements just on ADA alone. Just on ADA alone. In 2015, $128 million in damages were paid out. And this is just the stuff that went through the legal system. Who knows what was settled out of court or what was settled between employer and employee. So make sure from an ADA perspective, it's so gray, but just make sure you're documenting what your decisions are and how you're doing that. That's why outsourcing is so important, because you can outsource your ADA and have Voc resources look at those restriction limitations. Look at the job description and how you can modify their workstation in a cost-effective manner. You know, about 80% of modifications are less than $100. Less than $100, because a lot of times, maybe a keyboard, maybe one of those pads underneath their workstation, maybe an arm for their monitor. They can be simplified expenses to get an employee back to work. Question?
I have a question where ADA falls into in a workers' comp and reasonable accommodation because it's not a permanent disability. So this just actually really happened. So if a person has a temporary workers' comp, don't they have still the right to request a reasonable accommodation under ADA?
Yes.
Even though it's temporary? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Just real quick, L&I will pay for part of your modification for employees.
It was more about a workstation. It was about putting a worker on a lower level because there's no elevator.
Well, even that, it's
Yeah.
like $4,000?
Well, they will put an elevator in. It was just a matter of the inconvenience.
Yeah, totally.
And I was feeling that they are a violation of ADA.
But again, a lot of time it's business decision. You know, okay, is it reasonable? I mean, how much is it going to cost to move the workstation
Exactly.
downstairs?
And it was a matter of location.
Yeah, definitely.
But I had read some stuff where there's been this debate if it falls under reasonable accommodation because it's a temporary disability.
Yeah.
So,
It would fall in my thoughts and what I've seen, that would fall under ADA.
and that's what
Anything where there's an accommodation, whether it's a temporary or a permanent perspective, falls under ADA. And frankly, you want to identify it as ADA more than not identifying it. You know, where you walk through and document that interactive process, document the restriction limitations, document why you're doing it or why you're not doing it. Yeah, definitely. This is a nice slide that actually we just put out 2 months ago, but it's actually out of date already because Connecticut is not pending anymore. They just passed their state lead laws from a fiduciary perspective for 1/1/20. And as you can see, there's the big Washington one there for 1/1/20, having a paid leave law in place here in Washington. But as you can see, it's just going to get more and more complex. Hawaii is now involved, as the Washington D.C. I just read about Maryland. Maryland actually just got out of committee and is on the governor's desk to get signed from a paid family leave perspective. And there's also all the talk about having a federal paid leave program. Who knows if that's going to happen? Our lobbyists say it's not going to happen until, or get talked about at least till after midterms are over. So we're looking at, gosh, 21. That's actually a year. 1/1/21 from an effective law if they even look at it from a federal perspective. So just states are becoming more and more involved, and then those municipalities that are now getting involved from a leave law perspective. I just threw this slide together. I think I did a good job, so to say, putting the flag up there and everything. There's a lot of different versions of that logo of Washington. Some were a little scary. I was like, that's not a good one I want to put on there. So there's 2 different laws that are now currently in effect with the state of Washington. So you have the FLA Act or the Family Leave Act, which mirrors the federal act from an eligibility perspective. So that's one thing that's kind of nice. It mirrors the federal regs, so it's not like state of Iowa where it's 4 employees or New Jersey where it's 1,000 hours and not 1,250. So that's nice from an eligibility perspective that it mirrors the federal. In most cases, it runs concurrently with the federal act. There's only three kind of specific scenarios where it comes up where it can run after the federal law. Case of pregnancy, care of domestic partner, and then if the employee exhausts all or part of it, of the entitlement because of military, the employee can then have access to this all 12 weeks from a state perspective. So they can have that full 26 weeks after, or they can have that additional 12 weeks after that first 26 weeks from a federal perspective. So those are the three scenarios where it doesn't run concurrently. And then the Washington paid sick leave law that went into effect 1/1/18. There's the approved usages. Really mirrors a lot what California is doing from a state leave law perspective, just not as complex from an eligibility perspective. And then we're currently working already with so we have lobbyists in all 50 states that are keeping track of everything that comes out from an interactive process. As you know, New York paid family leave rolled out this year, which was, we call in the industry an absolute dumpster fire. I mean, it was a mess up until 30 days before it became effective. From what I hear, Washington's going to be a different situation. It sounds like they have their ducks in a row and they're going to have process, procedure, everything out well ahead of time so we can ask questions and clarify, because as a servicer, we don't want to take over anything unless we know we're 100% compliant. And so with the state of Washington, very, very confident that if they do allow carriers to administer the paid family leave, which it looks like, we will be 100% compliant 1/1/20 when that comes into effect. So when you're looking at maybe a potential partner for outsourcing, ask about that leave law and if they're going to manage it and if they're going to be compliant on the effective date. Because there are some carriers out there that we're still working on it. Like for New York paid family leave, we were effective 1/1/19 or 1/1/18. Some carriers weren't ready to go. So that puts you kind of at a loss because you're paying to outsource and be compliant, but yet you're not being compliant on every reg that's out there from a state perspective. So talking about some of the activity. So where are we seeing a lot of the activity when people are outsourcing? The same resource for the STD and FMLA. That's where we see the biggest jump. Employers are seeing the value in bundling the short-term disability and the FMLA together to make it easier for themselves, to make it easier for their employees. And obviously there's some other things down there that they look at in outsourcing, but that number one is the same resource because it makes it easier to manage from an employer perspective and an employee perspective. So let's say, for example, I go home to San Diego this weekend, tear my knee up, I have to have knee surgery. So I can call in, if it's the same resource, I can call in, file my short-term disability, my FMLA, with one person, one phone call, one scenario, one situation where I only have to give them one set of paperwork or confirm my surgery once. I don't have to confirm it twice or with different resources or different people. It's a singular approach. So it's that customer experience that's becoming more and more key in HR and looking at outsourcing is that employee experience. For example, telephonic intake. Last year, 74% of the leaves that we took in were telephonic. Because you got to think about, we're still figuring out FMLA and we're in the industry. What do you think your employees are at? The majority of your employees, on a scale of 1 to 10 from a knowledge perspective on FMLA, maybe a 1, maybe a 2. So having a form or going to a website, they can do that totally, but talking to a live person, having that centralized intake is key for the customer experience because they're able to get their questions answered, have a clear understanding of what's happening next, and they have a partner in the process. That's a key word, partner in the process. They don't feel like they're alone. They don't feel like they're calling a big brother or having somebody watch over them. And having that first experience being so positive is key. It's kind of like setting up dominoes. If you don't set those first 2 up correct, they're not going to fall. Like I'm a big Delta guy. I actually just made platinum with Delta already this year, and I'm very proud of that. That's one of my New Year's resolutions is always getting platinum with Delta every year. So I've already done that. It's May, so I'm very proud of myself. But I have a platinum phone number that I can call, dedicated line. It's not like up in the air George Clooney or like they know your name and stuff. But I have to say representative 5 times before I actually talk to a person. I have to sit there on the airplane and say representative 5 times. I counted it out the last time I got stranded. That's not a positive customer experience. So when you're looking at outsourcing, when you're looking at a partner, ask a lot of questions about what are my employees going to experience in the process. So that's one of those best practices. And then when you look at the centralized STD and FMLA, it's continuing to grow. So right now, 27% of employers out there co-locate their STD and FMLA together. 54% are outsourcing their short-term disability, but still managing their FMLA in-house. And then 13% are managing short-term disability and FMLA in-house. So those are some of those percentages out there when like, okay, this sounds great, Jason, but how many people are actually, taking the bait? How many people are biting? So 27% of your peers out there have a co-located STD, LTD outsource partner. Any questions on that? So kind of what are the outcomes? What are the areas of improvement? FMLA kind of gets thrown in with EAP, like, what's my ROI? Like, Jason, you say I get 50% of my time back, that's great, but like, what does it actually do for me from a data perspective? You'll see reduced costs from a direct perspective. You'll see return to work rates improve. I think that's key. It's not necessarily we get more people back to work, but we get them back to work in a timely manner. Because if you think about your process right now that you're managing, there's probably paper involved. Probably a lot of paper involved. There's probably a lot of hands that touch it. You're losing time to positively impact that claim already, that FMLA leave. So I started 20 years ago as an LTD claim manager, a long time ago. I had a lot more hair and it was a different color. But one of the things that was so great about a claim manager is I was able to call and say, hey, how was your doctor's appointment 2 days ago? Instead of saying, how was your doctor's appointment 2 weeks ago? You've already lost your ability to positively impact that employee, to get them back to work. So not necessarily you're going to see a jump in return to work, but timely return to work. One of the bigger clients I work with in Detroit saw a 5-day improvement. They were handling it themselves, they outsourced, 5-day improvement on getting people back to work. So that you're getting their employees back to work a week sooner by outsourcing. There's your ROI right there. And then that better employee experience is just becoming more and more of a better outcome. Because again, when your employee feels like they're being taken care of, they're going to take care of you. They're going to want to come back to work sooner rather than later. So being proactive about that. And then I did throw in the ROI slide. So here's some of the potential that you see when we outsource. So Guardian, we bought Reed Group 6 years ago, who's an independent absence management provider. They handle Amazon, ExxonMobil, Johnson & Johnson. They're the really big companies. And so we utilize a lot of their data when we look at improvements and getting money back and costs and such. And so this is what we see in first-time outsourcers, that 50% reduction in administrative time. So the processing time, enhancing the employee experience, the improved coordination with short-term disability work comp, having the data. And we take the rubber stamping employers out of it, so employers that have some good data, we see about a 7.5% reduction in the approval rate. And that's just properly, declinating people. That's properly approving them or denying them and what they're eligible for. And then we see about a 3.3% reduction in duration. Not because we're shutting people off, but we're managing it proactively instead of reactively. So when someone's out, like I tear my knee up in San Diego this weekend, I'm gonna get a call from my lead manager 2 weeks before I'm supposed to go back to work. Hey, how are things going? Are you still trending to return to work in 2 weeks? Are things going good? Hey, things are going better. I can actually go back a week sooner. Great, let's start that process. Or on the opposite end, now I need to take more time off, my pain management's not working out, I'm having some swelling, I'm not gonna be able to stand. All right, then let's proactively manage it instead of reactively manage it, where that 8 weeks is already elapsed and they're calling me, hey, I was supposed to go back to work yesterday, but I can't go back to work, what am I supposed to do now? So that's where you see that durational improvement when you outsource for the first time. So what are some of the factors, what are some of the key factors that you want to look at when you're looking for a partner? Compliance resources. Are they 100% compliant with all state and federal leave laws out there? That's a question to ask. Another question to ask, consistency. I talk a lot about that it's an entitlement platform. It's rules-based. How are they setting up their rules? How are they administering that? How are they tracking the changes from a case law perspective? When something comes down from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, how is that being interpreted to how they manage it? Last year we did 64 modifications to our FMLA process because of case law throughout the country. A rules-based system. How are they tracking that eligibility? How are they getting the eligibility from you, the employer? How are they reporting it back to you from a rules-based perspective? And then that client reporting. You know, you still need to know where your employees are at the process. Now that you're outsourcing, hey, it's great. You know, you think you can, hey, great, they're gonna handle it, bye-bye, have a nice day. No, you still need to know where your employees are at in the process. When are they coming back to work? How much time do they have left? How am I being communicated back with? And through real client reporting, is it real time? Is it batched every night? Is it once a week? Is it once a month? Is it the 14th and the 28th of every month? How are you being reported back on where your employees are at in the process? And then that last one I've already talked about, the customer experience. You know, FMLA isn't like dental claims where 70 or 80% of them just get shoved into a computer system and, okay, it's in network or it's out of network, here's a procedure code, here's how much you get paid. Every FMLA leave needs to be touched by a person. Even though you need to have that rules-based system, even though you need to have the kind of the back end to run it, having that point of contact, having that partner in the process is key in that employee experience. And frankly, not having a Alexa or a Siri on the front end of, how can I help you today? You know, doesn't work. So those are really the kind of those key things that you want to look at when outsourcing. And some additional resources, these are not Guardian specific materials. I want to point that out. A couple of them here that even though our logo is at the bottom, the cost of mismanaging FMLA. That's a key thing. If you have a controller or a CFO, like, oh, this sounds great. How are we going to pay for this? How is this going to impact? That's a great one page that talks about that 6% of total payroll with mismanagement. And then that FMLA checklist is actually a little bit more detailed than the questions that I put out there. Things that you can ask yourself, like, what am I doing internally? Even if you're not looking at outsourcing, it's good to look at, okay, what am I doing these steps in place? And then also there is a company index scorecard. So you plug in your SIC code, how many employees you have, state, actually, obviously Washington, if you're multi-state or not, and it will tell you how you look against your peers with your specific size. So I talked a lot about that 50 to 250 space, but if you're over 250 or you're teetering on that line or you want to look specifically at your SIC, it'll take all that survey that we did in 2017, it takes all that data and benchmarks you against your peers, even down to an SIC code perspective. So that's a great tool, again, to maybe work with your internal business partners that, hey, let's take a look at outsourcing. Our peers are doing it. It creates a better employee experience, saves us time, saves us money. So those are some great resources. They're all available on Guardian anytime. And actually, I think we got you some of the PDFs as well. You can take a look at that. And I'll obviously partner with everyone here on looking at a carrier partner to outsource. Appreciate the time. I see dessert is coming here. So good timing. What questions do you guys have? Is there anything? Wendy, go.
Okay. How
I have
does
good
this,
vision still. I still have my 20/20 vision. Everything else is going, but I
how
got
does
that.
this interact, if at all, with workers' comp leaves?
From a data integration perspective,
Or someone managing it, or someone assessing it, or someone keeping track of it, and someone reporting it? And
yeah. So a lot of times when someone does outsource, you know, there's kind of two schools of thought out there right now with managing FMLA. Actually, a lot of work comp carriers and TPAs are now getting into the lead management area because they're saying, let us handle your work comp, let us handle your FMLA, because we can data mine that and manage it effectively. Or you have the carrier approach where we look at more of the whole person in a medical overlay and medical support. Now, we do talk to work comp carriers on information exchange but we have that signed by the employer. There has to be some connection set up.